Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we're bringing you a first look at Tier 9 Premium French Cruiser, Super Cruiser thing. This is Carnot. Now, if you're like me, if you're of an engineering bent or an engineering background, you might be mistaken, you might be forgiven for being mistaken that this ship was named after Carnot of the Carnot cycle, right? Thermodynamics, yes. For those of you that had thermodynamics in college, like me, yes, I am a giant flaming nerd. You might remember the Carnot cycle and think, oh, I know that guy. And hold on. This ship is more likely named for Lazare Carnot, who was a member of the original French Revolution in the 1790s, had played a big role in all of that, later on became Napoleon Bonaparte's Minister of War, but actually refused to vote for Napoleon becoming the first emperor of France, which would have been the hereditary title and everything. He was a staunch Republican, despised all of that, among other things. But he was also an engineer. And so in the beginning of the 20th century, the French honored him with a battleship name named after him. And I believe that is where the name for this ship is being taken from. So anyways, a little bit of history lesson there before we get into the guts of this ship. So what are we looking at? If you are familiar with some of the other supercruisers at Tier 9, I'm talking about Alaska, Azuma, Ägir, Siegfried to a lesser extent, but there are now a number of Tier 9 premium supercruisers, battlecruisers, whatever you want to call them, that mount 12-inch guns, and that's basically what Carnot is. Carnot is the French entry into that category. So we're going to spend most of our time comparing her to ships in the 9 and 10 range that have a similar main battery armament, that is to say 305, 310-ish millimeter guns, something along those lines, okay? So let's get started talking about survivability. Huge chunk of health here, 66,450 hit points. This is almost good enough for best in tier for her little subset here at Tier 9, except, damn you, Russia, Kronshtadt still exists, which is over 71,000 hit points. This is still quite respectable. This is more than Alaska. And it's nice to see, right? It tells you that, we're used to French ships maybe being a little on the squishy side, maybe having a few less HP than some of their counterparts. You don't really see that here in Carnot, and I'll be curious to check out her armor scheme in a minute, and we'll look at that and see how we think that's going to hold up over the long term. 19% torpedo protection, not amazing. Not amazing. I mean, Alaska's is worse, 13%, but basically everybody else of this bent is better. It's just like the old mantra with cruisers, guys. Don't take torpedoes. Just don't. Your hull is not built to handle it. You're not a battleship with big torpedo bulges. You don't have it, so yeah, don't worry about that. Maneuverability and concealment. So let's talk about maneuverability first. This is the more notable of the two. 34.5 knots. This ship are quick, kids. For the class of the type that she's kind of competing with and everything, this is a lot of speed. The only ship in this sort of category that can go faster than this is Stalingrad. Of course, Stalingrad's up at Tier 10. She moves a full 35 knots. So Carnot outpaces Azuma by a half a knot. She outpaces Alaska by a knot and a half. She outpaces Ägir by a full knot. So, and she outpaces Kronshtadt by a full knot. So this is basically, for her tier and her type, this battlecruiser, supercruiser thing, she is the fastest. And that's quite lovely. And that's going to play into some of her consumables, and we'll see that in a little bit. 870 meters on the turning circle. Nothing to write home about here, right? This is actually, I mean, it certainly is nice, right? It's in the same vein though. Like the turning circles of this type basically run from 850 up to 920, right? So there's a very narrow range, and you're right in the middle of a very narrow range. Honestly, in my opinion, if you've driven one of the other battle cruisers at Tier 9, an Ägir or an Alaska, well, she probably won't handle quite like an Alaska. Alaska, I think, is a shorter overall length. But overall, just look at the ship. She's got quite a bit of freeboard here, but she's got a decent overall length. I think if you were to compare her to, say, an Ägir in terms of handling, you're probably not going to be horribly far off. Smaller turning circle than Ägir. Or excuse me, yeah, slightly smaller, roughly the same, faster, but yeah, she'll be nice. And then 14.4 second on the rudder shift. Again, nothing to get excited about here. I mean, it technically is worse in tier, but we're talking about the others are, 14, 13.9, yeah, big deal, right? Detectability, you see there with her fancy dazzle camo there, she comes in at 14.8. You strip her down to naked, she is 15.3 on the surface. That is not great. I mean, But again, at the same time, it's very comparable to the other ships of this type in this tier. Alaska retains her 15.5. Kronshtadt is still worse at 16.2. And then Azuma and Ägir both coming in at 15.1. Fully stealth rigged. Carnot here will get down to 12 kilometers on the surface. You're not going to sneak this ship up on anybody, right? I mean, that's not really shocking. That's kind of to be expected, if we're honest. I'm sorry, I said 12. 12, yeah, 12 even, yeah. I mean, again, Azuma and Ägir will beat her at 11.9, but that's literally it, okay? And then aerial detection, 10.6, full stealth rig, get her down to 8.6. I mean, yeah, again, you're not hiding. Ship this big will be seen from the air. Not much you can do about it. All right, so let's talk about the main battery, right? That's why we're here, of course. Now, Carnot's main battery is built around 305mm guns. Okay, these are 50 caliber guns. You see them here. I've got a forward turret of triple. The A turret is a triple. The B turret is a quad. This is very unusual. And then the aft turret returns to, come on, there we go, returns to the triple. So all in all, I have 10 barrels of 305mm Joy to throw downrange at my opponents. That's actually really nice. That does give her a higher barrel count than anybody else in this tier and type. So that's kind of noteworthy. Her reload, though, I think is what they're really using to make up for it, right? Because her reload is 24 seconds, which feels really, really bad. And it definitely, you know, when you run her DPM numbers and look at things, it definitely makes a difference in terms of how she compares to her contemporaries. Let's look at the shell damages here. Give me a moment. Here we go. So 4250 for the HE and 8700 for the AP. 4250 still pretty good, right? You're competing with Alaska, slightly worse. 8700, again, you're competing with the Japanese here. You're not as good as Ägir, and you're not quite as good as Alaska. So you're putting more shells downrange, right? And you're putting, but individually, every salvo takes a little longer because you have that extra barrel. That's kind of feels like how they've balanced it, right? They give you extra barrel, but every salvo takes an extra 4 seconds to load. Fire chance is pretty good there, 25%. That is technically worse, but it's like everybody else is like 27, so it's only a couple of points worse. Plenty of penetration on these HE shells. You see there, 51mm. 19 kilometers range is pretty comparable to most of the competition. Ägir a little less than this, 18.5. Azuma 19.1. Alaska, same range, literally 19 even. Kronshtadt, the shortest of them all, 18.2. So, yeah, I mean, she kind of fits right in, right? Shell velocities look like they're going to be really comfortable to fire, too. You're looking at essentially 900 meters per second. These ought to be very comfortable guns to use. I'm very curious to see how her main battery performs in action. We'll talk about the secondaries real briefly, because she does have 8-kilometer secondaries. Now, I'm not convinced we should look into... I didn't talk about the armor scheme. We'll do that in a minute. I'm not convinced you should be spending much time in secondary range, but she does have these kind of little oddball 139mm turrets. Now, if you've driven a French destroyer, you might recognize where these come from. These are essentially little French destroyer main battery turrets, but here on Carnot, they are secondary turrets. She's got two next to the barbettes, 4 and 2 next to the barbettes aft, right? And then she's spattered with these little 100mm dual-purpose AA batteries kind of all over the place, and then of course they will also double as surface batteries. Only 17mm of pen out of these guns, so you're not going to get a whole lot. You might get some fires if you end up brawling with a battleship or whatever. But this ship does not have torpedoes, so you probably don't want to spend much time in close range dealing with anybody. All right, I apologize. I skipped over the armor. Let's take a step back, okay? Because this is a big ship. There's a lot of ship here, okay? 25mm bow. This feels kind of bad, right? There are regular American heavy cruisers that have more bow armor than this. All right, so Carnot already you got to get the sense she is not built for brawling. Okay, it doesn't feel like it anyway. 30mm on the casemate belt, 36mm on the deck armor. So, yeah, she can stand up to with this deck armor will allow her to better to stand up to heavy cruisers, right? Traditional 8-inch arm heavy cruisers, which is really what the ship is meant to hunt and fight and kill. But with only 25mm of bow armor, you're not even really able to stand up to even like a 15-inch armed battleship, right? You're going to have to try and find a way to either out DPM him or just not be around. Use your range, something. Belt armor is only 180mm. Again, this is... this is kind of not great. Let me run a quick comparison here. What are we looking at? I know the Alaska's is better. Alaska's is like 229. Kronstadt's 230. Azuma's 180, and Ägir's 190. So you're in the same ballpark as everybody else, but you can't rely on this belt armor. Again, this kind of belt armor allows you to fight effectively other heavy cruisers, potentially other super cruisers, but you really don't want to get into a fight against a battleship with this thing unless that battleship is very low and you can kill him in a couple of salvos, because he will probably do horrible, unspeakable things to you before you die. Quick look at the Citadel. Let's just take a peek under the hood here. Citadel is quite long. Does encompass the entirety of the forward magazines and the aft magazines, but it is quite low in the water. You can see there it just sort of barely kisses the waterline. We do have a bit of that French spaced armor scheme going on in here, right? So you can see here the belt armor, and there is a noteworthy gap between the belt and the torpedo bulge, torpedo protection, and then the inner Citadel wall. So, you know, if you've fought against like an Henri Quatre at long range or a Saint Louis at long range, you know that occasionally some of these plunging shots will get caught in and rattle around this torpedo protection, and you get nothing out of it. I mean, Carnot certainly has a French armor scheme that will enable her to do that. Should you find yourself in that situation? Does she have a turtleback? I want to check. She does have a little bit of a turtleback. Check that out. Only 20 millimeters. So again, this is not a ship built for brawling, guys. Don't brawl in this thing. At least not if you want to live very long. Yikes. Yikes. Ägir, she isn't. Ägir, she isn't. Last, let's look at AA before we get on to consumables. A suite is not bad. Mostly built around, as we mentioned, the 100mm dual-purpose guns here along the sides. This is her long-range aura. She puts up 6 flak puffs, 1,400 damage a pop at 5.8 kilometers. So decent little flak, you know, decent amount of flak there. 140 on the outer ring, 326 on the middle ring on the back of the 40mm Bofors, like you do see out of ships in this era. And then she's got some 20mm guns that make up her inner aura. Her AA is okay. It's roughly analogous to like Ägir's AA in the sense of it's about the same strength and about the same kind of spread of concentration. Alaska's is better. Azuma's is not. Kronstadt's is definitely not. Kronshtadt has the worst AA out of all these guys that we're talking about in Tier 9. So, with all of that said, right, we've looked at the guns. The guns are nominally a little worse. Not amazingly so, but the slower reload, you'll feel that, right? Armor schemes, nothing to write home about, really. So what else? What does she bring something on the consumable side that makes her really awesome? And the short answer is, yes and no. She does get a choice between defensive fire and hydro, as you would expect. And then, of course, over here, she gets her choice between French speed boost. You see the 20% bonus there. That's quite lovely. Or aircraft facilities. She does have aircraft facilities on the stern, but she has to choose between the engine boost or taking the spotter or the fighter. I could see a valid case. You could make a case for the spotting aircraft. I feel like Carnot feels to me, at first glance like this, like a ship that might be best kind of playing like Azuma, right? Azuma is a very, very softly armored ship that really likes playing at long range and just lighting everything on fire and just being a general nuisance of itself. I could see Carnot playing like that. The lack of torpedoes is another thing that really makes her analogous to Azuma, and I think does definitely limit the ship, right? But the engine boost allows you to reposition, right? You can take this, you're already the fastest ship of this type in this tier. Now you can put on a speed flag, then you can load this thing on top. You're looking at 20%. This thing will do over 40 knots, right? So if you're looking for something that's going to reposition around the board, there's something to like here, right? This ship can absolutely get other places quicker than her contemporaries on the back of this engine boost. So there's definitely some things to like here. She does get a standard heal, and then of course the traditional damage control party. Nothing exciting to write home about here. So yeah, that is Carnot. I don't really know that on paper, just at a first glance, I don't really know that this ship has a real identity out in Tier 9, right? We've got what, 4 other 12-inch armed super battlecruiser type things in Tier 9 already. You have Ägir, Alaska, Kronshtadt, and Azuma. Now you're adding Carnot. So you're adding another nation that's bringing their entry to things, but I'm not convinced that it's really adding anything new, right? Alaska has a very unique niche that she fills with her crazy American piercing, her AA, and the improved ricochet angles and all that stuff from the American piercing. Kronshtadt with the crazy velocities, her horrible dispersion, yes, but the crazy velocities. Those guns are essentially the predecessor to Stalingrad guns, and occasionally they do dumb, just lunatic things. Ägir, a bit of a brawler, right? German armor scheme, good secondaries, but the torpedo armament and the hydro allows her to do things that you can't necessarily do with Alaska. And then Azuma, which is more of a long-range kind of HE spammer, kind of sits back, kicks back at 16 kilometers, makes a real jerk of itself, burns battleships and heavier cruisers to the waterline, that kind of thing. I'm not really sure where Carnot fits in all of that. She feels more like Azuma on paper, but I don't know that I look at her and think, oh, I'd rather play this than Azuma. So I think this is a ship right now to me that, as I look at it on paper, is kind of lacking an identity, and I'm curious to see what they do with her as they refine her through the super testing process. If they kind of find her one, right? They kind of maybe jiggle some parameters on the ship and maybe change her consumable loadout and kind of give her an identity, or if they leave her here to just kind of languish as like a French-ish version of Azuma, and she's just kind of there. I don't know. We'll have to see. Anyway, guys, there you go. Hope you enjoy that. There's our first look at Tier 9 Premium French Cruiser Carnot. Wash your hands. Be safe. I'll catch you later.